To whom much is given, much is required. Part of that requirement is sharing. Culture is the heartbeat within our lives, and it's at the core of so many things. While we live in a time when we are starving for wisdom, I welcome you to your wisdom retreat at Culture Raises Us. Today's guest, Alicia Wainwright, actually is a former scientist who turned actor, who starred in Raising Dion, Shadowhunters, and is now part of the new Apple TV Plus romantic comedy, Platonic. Super excited for her to share her journey from science to acting. I think while still feeding, her passion of science, which we'll hear about through her work around the broad scope of human health challenges, as I'll call it. But before we do that, I really want to start with our key question of, when you hear culture, what does that mean to you?
First of all, thank you for having me. I would say that when I think of the culture, I think of the flavor. It's the flavor of the person. So what is it that kind of adds that essence to your character? So whether you're coming from a culture in the Middle East versus a culture in South America, like there's like flavors to the essence of a person that's influenced by the culture, but like inherently we're all the same. So that's kind of how I approach thinking about culture.
I love the flavor piece. So true. So a very high level intro I gave. Obviously, I'd love for you to kind of share a little bit more about yourself, your upbringing, and just a little bit about your story. And obviously, we'll go into a lot more of that in the rest of the talk, but just love to hear from you.
Yeah. So I went to university for botany from Florida. I'm from Florida. And when I graduated, I did a post-baccalaureate internship at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in the Panama Canal. And while I was there, I learned a lot about kind of what the industry of science is like and what it would require for me, and just the intense dedication towards research, which I realized I lacked. And I kind of had a little bit of an existential crisis. I moved to California because it seemed fun. And I actually did a wine harvest because I thought perhaps I could pivot plant science to plants, like agriculture or something like that. And I ended up moving to San Francisco and found my way into acting through a community of friends that I had there, and then made my move to LA once I had a little bit of experience under my belt. And so what's fun is that I have this background in science, and for years I never really talked about it. It just kind of never really came up. And lately, for whatever reason, it's almost like something in my life is pushing me towards revisiting this aspect of my previous career. And it came to a head when one day I got an email from this British production company, and they were like, "Hey, you don't know us, but we love your show, Raising Dion, and we realize you used to be a scientist. We have this podcast that we're trying to get started about public health science and awareness for kind of, if you will, like underserved areas in the news and media about science. So women, countries like in South America, in Asia, and these places where maybe Western media isn't really focusing on the, cutting edge research that they're doing. Would you want to host this podcast?" And I was just like, this fell into my lap. And I'm like, how did you even get my personal email? They're like, "Oh, well, you wrote a paper in college, and we just emailed that email," which is an email I still have from when I when I graduated college, which is insane to me. And there was something about that level of research that they did, and the connection that they had towards me and my history in science, that I knew I had to figure out how to make it work. And so it took several months to come together, but then now I have this incredible podcast, When Science Finds a Way, and it's partnered with the Wellcome Trust, which is this incredible organization that gives so much money to fund research for these communities that are kind of empowering people at the ground level. And that's something that I'd love to talk to you about in terms of culture and giving people their own agency, how that inspires like a fostering of community, and develops culture. So that's a little bit about my history. And then sprinkled in there, do movies, do TV shows, all that
Just a couple
stuff.
of those things.
Just
Just a
like,
couple of those little things.
I'm an actor, but it's just, I feel incredibly blessed to be able to come full circle and be able to infuse my previous experience with, maybe I'm a little bit more articulate now than I was.
That's right. You're more prepared.
Exactly. I got some lived experience and I can approach things like podcasting with a little bit more openness and fun and, so it's cool. I feel really
no, it is a blessing. It's also a blessing to be able to be open to receiving, these divine connections, right? Because it sounds like when you were looking at it, it was like this divine connection. Like these people just reached out to me, had access to a paper that I did in college, had my old email address. Like all those things look crazy for regular people, but when you're kind of locked into your purpose, a lot of these things no longer look crazy. It's just kind of part of the divine plan of these connections were supposed to happen. And now you're in the place of being ready to receive and step into it, like you just said.
And when this show came to me, Raising Dion had just been canceled after its second season. And many actors can feel really disheartened and when am I ever going to work again? And am I going to work again? I need a job and all that stuff. And it can feel really overwhelming. And to be offered this opportunity at a point when I wasn't shooting was incredibly helpful because now I have the mental space to actually give it attention and nurture this process and be more involved in the process. And I think if I was just shooting and doing this on the side, I wouldn't be able to give it nearly as much love and attention as I am able to now. And I learned a little bit about my capabilities. Like maybe I could host something in the non-scripted space. Maybe I would approach doing another season of the podcast.
Right.
Like these are all things that I just wouldn't have had the mind space for if I was doing what I thought I should be doing, which is, working continually in TV and film.
That's right. Well, you obviously have quite the journey with your shift, I'll call it, from science to acting. But starting with the science piece, and as you mentioned, at the University of Florida, where you studied botany, and then moving to Panama, which blew my mind, to conduct this field research in preparation for a PhD as a Smithsonian biologist. I mean, this is a whole lot of words right here and a whole lot of descriptions. Where did this passion for science come from? And I only ask because I'm sure growing up, there probably weren't a lot of people who looked like us in the limelight within the scientific community, right?
You would be correct. I grew up in a suburb of South Florida. And in my community, it was pretty split between I would say like about half white and then quarter Latino and then a quarter Black. And it was pretty like, that what I call like mild segregation, which is like, some like the school district I went to like was racially segregated within the school. So it was very diverse if you looked at the numbers, but typically people kind of tapered off.
Gravitated to their own.
Yeah. And so it was interesting because I was kind of a bright kid. So I ended up in these like, I had to kind of fight my way into getting into some of these honors program spaces because it almost felt like inherently they tried to segregate those as well. And so being able to have a seat in those classes, I was one of a few brown kids. And then I just wasn't really getting a lot of attention for my academics. For example, it was like I was coming home with grades that were not on par with what they used to be. My mom was really concerned. So she moved me to a different school and helped me get some like tutoring and stuff like that to kind of level up my everything. I was slowly, what do you call it? Like you're not making your benchmark achievements.
Right.
So in that trial period, I would say around like middle school, when she started to notice that my school was not helping me benefit as a student. And think about it, I graduated magna cum laude from University of Florida, but in middle school, if you're not getting that focused attention on education because you're teacher doesn't think you have the aptitude. Like my life could have taken a totally different trajectory if my mom hadn't intervened.
That's
And
right.
one of those interventions was to put me in science camp. So in the summer, my mom found this science camp. It was a STEM camp geared towards diversifying students at this camp. And they had every week, I believe it was a different area of science. So one week it would be marine biology, and then one week it would be mathematics, and another week it would be physics. And it's just these very basic, simplistic things just to introduce these young minds into STEM. And one of those weeks, 2 weeks really that stood out to me, was the marine biology week and the botany week. So learning how plants work, how they function, and then learning ecosystems. That's the real takeaway I got, because we went to a pond and we like took pond water, we put it in a thing, and then we kind of monitored how everything was influencing each other. And I was so obsessed with trying to understand systems, ecosystems, ecology. And as I went through high school, I had so many varying interests, but when it came to picking a major, I had this grand idea of I'm going to double major. This, I don't think I've ever shared this before. I'm going to double major in botany and pre-med, and then I'm going to graduate. And then I'm going to go to the Amazon and I'm going to find some miracle plant. And then I'm going to infuse this miracle plant into some sort of product that then I can market to people, and it'll like revolutionize like skincare or like hair care or something like that. I really was interested in like branding some sort of unique thing. And I thought like, oh, coming from a scientist, people will respect what I'm going to end up doing. So this was like an idea that I had way back when. And all of that came from this science camp that I did in the summer, geared towards, POC kids in South Florida, to get them interested in science. So when I see these programs where I see, anyone geared towards trying to put a special focus on underserved communities in those spaces, I think about myself when I was a kid and how it changed my life. And even though I'm an actor now, and you're like, okay, well, you don't do that anymore. Here I am now, coming full circle in this interesting way. I have a platform now.
The seed that was planted. I'm so glad you're able to reference back in the importance of that camp, and the hope is that there are many opportunities like that for many others who look like you to also have that experience, right? And hopefully one day be the founder and creator of Vibranium, which I feel like that's what you were on the cusp of.
Basically, I wanted to start my origin Marvel story,
1,000. Listen, as you were selling the story, I was like, wait a minute, she might be like the inspiration behind Black Panther and Vibranium. This is outstanding. No, but seriously, I think you bring a lot of insight and knowledge around health related topics that don't seem to be on what I call the cultural radar, right? And I look at you talk about things like heat stress adversely affecting, women versus men. Is this very intentional for you to take on these type of topics?
Well, at this point in my career, I am a little sensitive of the kinds of organizations that I align myself with. And one of the things that I was very concerned about with aligning myself with the Wellcome Trust was understanding what is their core objective in terms of communicating their research to the public. What kinds of research are they interested in sharing, and what sort of things are they doing? I come from a strongly religious background, Southern Baptists. And, people would go on missionary trips where you go to an African country and you dig a well, and then you feel happy, you take a bunch of pictures and you leave. And these sorts of things are as well intentioned as they may seem. They don't necessarily serve the communities how they need to be. It's almost like this colonial outside idea of what you think they need. And I take strong issue with that. And I don't like that. And so when I found out that the Wellcome Trust, they don't do that. They do the opposite. They go to these underserved communities. For example, one of the organizations that we worked with rise, they focus in countries like Fiji, and they go to these communities that are not fully developed. They don't have full functioning water systems. And they go in there and they're like, what are your issues? Well, when it floods, I can't get to work. So rather than creating some highfalutin thing, they empower the people to help build better walkway systems that won't get flooded so that people can get to where they need to go.
Right.
And these organizations are just going back to some of the most basic things that people need, educating them on how to do it for themselves, and then empowering those individuals to get together as a community and be like, thank you for your help. Goodbye. And then they can start doing it for themselves, which is, I think, the most impactful thing. You know, what's the Bible, teach a man.
Fish. That's what was in my mind. That's
exactly.
right.
It's like, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, and he'll eat for the rest of his life.
That's
exactly.
Right. That's right.
And I think, like, with science and research and public health, you can just force people to take vaccines, or you can implement a community-based organization of people that maybe look like other people in the community, explain and educate them the benefit of these vaccines, and then encourage them to take it. You'll get a higher success rate of people getting inoculated. Like, these are things that, if you're not coming from a colonial mindset and you're actually looking at these underserved communities and asking them, what do you need? They will tell you, because they know better than you.
And they live it.
And they live it. Yes.
They're living it.
And exactly. And I think, you mentioned one of our episodes about heat stress. So Arstrock Resilience Center is an organization that goes to countries all over the world that are struggling with heat stress. And an example of one is in Malawi. There are these not Malawi, it's Sierra Leone. I've got a bunch of stats in my brain. In Sierra Leone, there are these open-aired markets where sometimes the sun is just pelting on these people. They're fainting at bus stops, and people are dying. And you can be like, well, let's put a bunch of air conditioners in there and like figure out a way to just get in there and muscle your way through it. But now you're talking about energy costs. It's not sustainable.
Right.
And what they've instead done is gone to these communities, discovered sustainable materials that these people already make, and then help them create these almost shade covers so that they can go through the market without being directly pelted by the sun, but still some light gets through so they can function in the market. And they can work longer hours. They can start to, they sell more goods. And it creates a sense of empowerment of, we were all suffering under this heat and people were getting sick. Most of these market workers are women. And now the community is feeling empowered to be able to now start doing it beyond the market in other areas, at bus stops, things that Arstrock Resilience Center had not originally set out to do, but the community now is like, oh, this is a great tool, and now we can start using it. That's just
right.
the thing that gets me super excited to work with an organization, because I'm a first generation American. My family's from the Caribbean. My father is from Haiti. And for many years, I have been incredibly outraged by organizations that come into Haiti and just tell them what to do. And if we can see a lot of that stuff doesn't work, Haitians are fully capable of taking care of themselves. Have you ever asked them what they need?
That's right.
So that's where I get heated, and that's where I get incredibly grateful that I don't have to feel that way about this organization that I've aligned myself with, because their number one priority is empowering people through research to find impactful solutions to change health outcomes. So
with that, are there specific topics, I'll say, within the health and science space that you think deserve to kind of be more discussed and highlighted within the culture space?
Well, of course, I think, there's a lot that I don't understand about a lot of different cultures. And I think even when I kind of poo-poo on a colonial mindset to me is one in which you think you know better for someone else. And
entitled, privileged
exactly
thinking. Right,
And
because you
even
don't have to. You have not dealt with it yourself, so you're looking from the outside and making an assessment.
facts.
Yeah,
And you can see it, but also be a part of the problem.
that's
So,
right.
so like, for example, we did an episode on human infection trials. So what happens is individuals will get infected with an
Mhm.
illness, and then under incredibly like monitored situations, they are given vaccines, and then they're studied to see the outcomes of the efficacy rates and things like that. And if you throw out the idea of a human infection trial to a lot of countries, say in the Caribbean or in Africa, you're going to get a lot of pushback.
Oh, a
People
ton,
are not
ton.
going to understand why that's beneficial. But
Right.
I'll tell you something that I learned. So most of these vaccines are being produced in like Western countries, the UK. I mean, in Asia as well, but also in the States. Just think about COVID-19 vaccines, okay, and where your vaccines came from. Now, the efficacy rate for an American receiving an inoculation for COVID-19 is different than if you were to, for example, go to Brazil and inoculate that person. It's going to have a lower efficacy rate.
Hmm.
And, or it might just be different. It might be, it just, and so you don't know until you understand it in your own community. And it's
That's right.
challenging when a lot of these medicines come from these countries that are prioritizing their own needs. So,
Well,
for
and so
example,
there's a lack of trust, a
exactly.
significant lack of trust, and rightfully so, to be honest, because it's agenda based too.
So here's the thing. So I came in with my American sensibility, which is like, F the system, like, all of this stuff is all like, they're coming out to get us. But in some countries, they actually think like, oh, if this vaccine's coming from the United States, I trust it
I
because it
trust it.
probably works really well. And I was like, no, they do not feel that way. They were like, they do. They think it's great. It's just in some countries, for example, vaccines are for children because vaccine numbers are so limited that you give
Mm,
vaccines to kids, you don't take it in as an adult. So the cultural curiosity is like, why would I take a vaccine? I'm 30 years old. I don't need it. Give it to the children. And that's the reason why they don't take the vaccine.
mm.
Not because they don't trust the agenda, because I'm coming here with my crazy conspiracy sensibilities of like, I can't trust like American Western medicine. But they're like, no, we
Hmm.
trust it. We just think it should go to the kids because we know we don't get that much vaccine. And that blew my mind
Right.
because
Mm.
I did not feel that way about vaccines. And so in understanding that, I was like, well, how do you educate those guys so that they can maybe understand? It's like, well, maybe it's not about education. Maybe it's about showing them these human infection trials and how they can help everybody. So you get people involved. And then it's through this slow exposure that eventually they come to understand the benefits of vaccine. Maybe if you get more vaccines in these countries, they're able to feel like there's not a limited supply. But you can't
Right.
change people's perspectives overnight. And
No.
that comes with a level of not coming in and presuming you know everything and we just need to educate them, or maybe not.
Right.
Maybe you just take a different approach, and over time maybe moods and feelings will change.
Right. And I think through that approach piece that you're talking about, I think the word that keeps coming to my mind is like prioritization or a focus, right? Because I think so often you have these situations and things that probably should be of prioritization or focus, but they're not, right? And so I look to you and I say, so what are some of the most profound topics that you consider to be of great interest or urgency to the general public, but haven't really made it to be a priority? Because again, for some reason, prioritization came to me when as I was listening to you talk.
Well, it's gonna sound like we've heard it a million times, but we did 12 episodes of this podcast in areas focusing on infectious disease, like long format research, so research that happens over decades and decades of time, mental health. But you know what
Mm,
every single one keeps getting influenced by? climate health.
Climate health.
So everything comes back to climate change. And it's frustrating because it feels like we're beating a dead horse. We all know it's a problem, but it's like watching people either A, get bogged down by it, like me, for example. I'm just so overwhelmed by where the impending fate of the world appears to be going. And then there are people who are like, well, I can just adapt and keep going and make solutions for people right now, considering things like heat and flooding and, different kinds of stressors that develop through climate change. And I feel like it's so much bigger than something you or I can individually do. Like
Right.
And that's where I get really overwhelmed. And that's where I feel like, for example, being, when I lived in Atlanta and shot some television over there, and like understanding how the Atlanta city system is set up. Do you know much about Atlanta and how like they basically just like rip through all these Black communities and put highways there because no one in the white communities wanted to have highways?
That's right. I did hear about that. Yes.
and that's horrible. You completely destroy communities. And then as you suffer through things like increased heat and pollution and all that stuff, now you have those communities suffering worse health outcomes. And then now everyone's like, oh, well, these communities are predominantly like getting sick. It's because they don't take care of them. Well, hold on. Why don't we just like back up and understand?
Come on. The context.
Yeah. And so it's just, for me, it's like, I do think in relation to culture, it's like, I get overwhelmed. I'm constantly learning how to become less overwhelmed. But at the end of the day, like climate change, climate health, these are things that can feel very overwhelming. But in the interviews that I've done and the people that I've met through learning more about public health research, I am grateful that there are people who are not as overwhelmed as I am, because they're actually doing meaningful work.
Sticking their heels in it.
Yeah, and changing the lives of the people who are most directly impacted from these things. Because I live in a home with air conditioning. Granted, there's a fear of fire, but I have a vehicle. Like, there are a lot of benefits that I have to navigate a lot of the pressures of climate change, but there are a lot of people on this planet that do not have those benefits. And so we need people researching to be able to come up with solutions.
Yeah, you talk about, it's that colonial approach, right? That mindset of when you are privileged, you have so much access to things that you don't have to think about, and you take an assumption, I'm thinking, that you apply to everyone else, right? I think whether you're searching for the latest sneaker drop, that iconic handbag, a timeless watch, or your next piece of classic jewelry, eBay authenticators are there verifying every detail of your purchase. Yep, we're talking each inch, stitch, tick, facet, and clasp that make the piece you're searching for worthy of your collection. eBay's authenticators are experts in their craft, true connoisseurs. And as leaders in their fields, they're making sure your items always arrive as authentic as your style. So go ahead, get that piece you've always wanted, and leave it up to the meticulous eyes of an eBay authenticator to make sure that watch movement is original, that glimmer is real gold, that rare sneaker is legit, or that handbag is really made of genuine leather and never get faked over again. In a world full of fakes, it's time to get real with eBay Authenticity Guarantee. Everyone deserves real. Visit ebay.com for terms. There are many of us who come from marginalized communities, who we obviously look at all these things in a different way of the privilege we're not taking for granted, because we know exactly what it feels like to not have all these privileges and these entitlements, where we have to look at everything as a blessing and a benefit. And this is something that we have, I think, an easier way to empathy than others, right? And empathy, I think, is also a lost art for many who are privileged, entitled. I love it, the colonial that you put on, but it's very real.
I'm
And so,
America. A lot of America. I mean, the first mind blowing experience I had was living in Panama and understanding how America had an incredible impact on the history of Panama and basically taking it from them to build the
mm,
canal. And a lot of the sensibilities of the people in Panama didn't necessarily love that point in history. And I was reflecting. I was like, oh, people don't
wow,
like Americans? I didn't know that. Why? We're
that's right.
great. And then it's like, oh, we are a great country, but we also create a lot of impactful situations around the globe, and people have feelings about that.
That's right. So, and so as I hear you talk about, climate health, I mean, you just enlightened me a great deal on the impact of that. And you touched a little bit on, what I call the buzz thing now of mental health and wellness, rightfully so, right? Because I know for many of us, we grew up with the stigma of, if you were seeing a therapist, you were crazy, right? Back in the day, where now it's like, if you don't see a therapist, you're crazy. And so when we look at mental health and wellness and them becoming more generally accepted and promoted, especially within pop culture within recent years, why do you think it's so vital for like people of color to be at the forefront of these conversations as it pertains to mental health and wellness?
Mm, man, this is a hard one because I first started seeing a therapist a few years ago, and my whole family felt terrified for me. What is wrong with
Right,
what
right.
is
See,
wrong with you that you
right,
need to
right.
see up there? Like, what is going
Oh,
on?
right. See, but
And
this is how we were programmed. This is
yeah,
how
of
we were
course.
programmed.
Yeah, and it was really scary because it felt really lonely to
Yep.
feel like I was the only one in my family that thought this was a good thing. And I have family who have some severe mental health disorders, and it's my family is understanding of that because it's like an extreme medical situation for some extended family members. But this middle ground, you bougie California girl
Right.
with like
Better than thou.
a good job and like what you have problems, and so it becomes a little bit like that, and it's kind of
Hmm.
hard to navigate. But at the end of the day, family's full of opinions, but my family's also full of a lot of love, and they
Yep.
can tolerate my philosophy on things while also kind of backing off. They don't necessarily want to hear about it. They don't necessarily want to hear me encourage them to maybe talk to someone sometimes. But what it has implored for me was just a deeper connection with some of my family because I'm able to not be so triggered by some of the ways in which my family operates or the things that they say. But I do think there's a deep fear for a lot of people in our community to talk to the older generations about their use of therapy or getting help for things that they might have seen to be trivial. Again, first generation American, I come from a family that's like, we came here to make your life better. There's nothing wrong with your life. So like,
Right. Right.
what do you have? What do you even talk to your therapist about?
Right.
And that's I'm like, I talk to them about you.
Right. Actually, how about that?
Yeah, but it's like, but again, my family, I am lucky enough to, despite the judgment on therapy, they do come with so much love and so much. They're aware that my life is unique because it has some challenges that they couldn't even wrap their minds around. Or
Fathom.
they are,
That's
yeah,
right.
and they are understanding of that. But for a lot of friends of mine, especially friends of mine who are either directly from the Caribbean or first generation as well, like there is a big struggle in
Yeah.
being able to just be respected for going to therapy. And I would love to see that be something that changed for the next generation. I mean, our parents are old. Like, let's be real. Like,
Yeah.
how much are we really? I want to feel respected by my parents, but I also don't know that I can necessarily change them at this point or that I want to. But I do hope for the next generation, my children, my cousins' children, that they are not given that same sense of judgment for wanting to have a non-judgmental person to communicate with, that's not a part of their social circle.
Well, you're doing your job because you're being the example, and I
Oh,
say that because I too have family from the Caribbean, first generation American. My family's from Jamaica, so it's the
oh,
same
yeah,
type of vibe, right?
Mhm.
But what I applaud you for is the power of being an example is critical, right? Because it's easy to talk about something, but when you actually live it and do it, and people can see it, it's to be put on a pedestal of doing the work to help break down stigmas. And I say that to say because you also being in the world of acting on TV and movies, there's all this mystique around that, and there's all this equity and value that comes with it of the type of individual that you're supposed to be. For you to incorporate into your lifestyle and your mental health wellness portion of it, this notion of therapy and things to that degree, you're already by example helping to break down those barriers and creating the new norm.
Mm.
You are part of creating the new norm. So I'm grateful that you are stepping into that space. And I'm also picking up on what might be a great foundation for you is your spiritual walk, that God is guiding you through all this, right? Everything happens for a reason. Nothing is happenstance in your journey, right? So you talk about the full circle of coming back to the science piece as you're in this acting world. All that was part of the plan, right? That adds more credibility to your voice now as you speak to these very important topics that might not have gotten the attention that they should have years ago,
Yeah.
right? So I applaud you for that.
Oh, well, thank you.
Um, no,
I
go
was
ahead.
I was going to say it's just one of many voices of our generation that are trying to shed light on this. Even
Yeah,
you as well, especially being able to have a platform like this, especially like for the culture, like for the Black community, for all sorts of people who may not necessarily feel like they're entitled to go to therapy and feel like they can talk about their feelings. Like this is a fantastic platform to give space to someone
no, thank
listening to
you.
maybe think about
I
it.
appreciate that, and we're not trying to. We can't be all things to all people, but we do want to bring all things to everyone,
Mm.
right? And I think there's a big difference in that, and you are part of that community or that offering of bringing everything to everyone. And I know you've been super impressed with even like a Michael B. Jordan, who was a co something you worked with in the past, and you've been very impressed with how he's kind of used his platform to produce projects that help many different racial and ethical communities. And I know you are now doing your own podcast, as you mentioned, with When Science Finds a Way, which I feel is so much a part of your way of using your platform as well. What's next though for you with regard to this, what I call purpose driven work?
Mm. Well, I'm going to tell a very brief story and then I'm going to answer that. So, when I moved to LA and I found myself in acting class and I started learning about the industry and what I had as like raw talent, what I needed to work on and grow as an actor, I would book these jobs. And this is like when we just got Instagram, like 2013 or something. And like I would post something on Instagram and I would go hashtag wannabe working actor. And I would do this for anything. So if it was like a commercial that I booked or like even like a non-union project, I'd always use that hashtag wannabe working actor. And I did like a scene in my acting class and I was going back to my seat and my teacher pulled me aside and he was like, "Hey, why do you think you are a wannabe if you're doing it?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He was like, "Look at the things that you have done this year. Stop pretending you are not that thing and commit
Mm,
to being that thing. I never want to see wannabe in front of anything you do ever again. You are a working actor." And I never forgot that because what
mm,
it reminded me is oftentimes I will try and make myself small because it's scary. It's scary to
that's right.
want something really big. It's scary to dream big because you might not get it, but oftentimes your dreams may not be where you end up, right? And it doesn't mean that the journey is not a fulfilling life. And so when I think about what I want to do next, I want to write and I want to direct and I
Mm,
want to start producing things for myself and for people in the community that I want to bring to the table. So, for example, I, you know, or like last year I wrote like a pilot, and I set like started like developing, like doing drafts and things like that, and like I'm shooting a short film that I co-wrote and will be directing and starring in. So like there are so many tiny little things that I'm just putting out into the real universe.
Manifesting, power of manifestation.
Because I feel like almost a little naked even saying these things because they're in their infancy. But at the same time, like if you don't start to acknowledge the reality, I start saying I'm a wannabe director, I'm a wannabe writer, and I no longer want to be in that space. I think the next chapter for me is constantly just trying, because at the end of the day, if the short film sucks, I will have learned something. I will have learned. You know what I mean?
You know, it's so funny you mentioned this. Just today, something was mentioned to me that I've heard many times, but it really stuck. And now you are reinforcing it once again. Nothing comes happenstance. Everything is all God's plan. And it's when you aim high, you're able to fail high. If you aim low, you're going to fail low. But even in the failure, you just said it. It's never failure. It's all learning.
Yeah.
All learning. Because even with the short film that you're talking about, if it does suck, if it's just one person that is moved or touched or inspired by it, guess what? You've done your job.
Yeah.
You've done your job. And you've now got a learning. You got a learning on what to move on.
Like, oh, I struggle in this aspect of directing, or I struggle in this aspect of producing, or wow, I'm actually really good. The hard part for me is being able to say, I'm really good at this part of it, you know, and being able to hype myself up. And I think like, you know, I'm not necessarily in a transitional period, but as I wait for my next show and I'm starting to develop some of my own things, it feels transitional to me. And I just have to keep reminding myself in those transition spaces, like, you are supposed to be here. Like, that's right. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Yeah. There's no shoulds. Just trust that something interesting is going to unfold if you try. But if you just sit there and wait for something to happen, you might be sitting there for a while.
That's right. So let me ask you this. How do you personally define social justice in 2023? And with that, what role do you believe entertainers should kind of play in promoting social justice issues in general?
I think I had a crazy burnout in 2020 around topics of social justice. And I was just so hurt and disappointed by everything, stuff I saw on social media, my communities, and that burnout was real. And what I started to feel like was the social justice that I can contribute is looking at my own community and figuring out how to be a better friend and family member to people who are suffering the weight of I don't even want to say like this, but just like of oppression. For example, my closest, dearest friend is from Iran, and last year there was an incredible movement started to galvanize young women of Iran to create change for their circumstances. They don't want to wear hijab. They want to be able to walk around freely and move freely without being, you know, oppressed by the police, basically. And my friend was suffering, and I am not from her community. I have empathy in terms of knowing what it's like to feel like you're suffering and the people around you that you care about are dying. And going and marching with her in LA, we did a march downtown, was so crazy to me, because the last time I had done that march was in 2020. And it was like so emotional, because whether it's for Black people, Asian people, any POC, and then now culturally Persian people, people from Iran, it's like we're all fighting for the same sense of equality and respect. And even people from like lower socioeconomic positions, everyone's fighting just to have a seat at the table and to be treated with some dignity and with respect. And I feel like if you are seated at the table and someone joins you, you treat them with dignity and respect, and you listen to them and you stand with them. So I learned a lot from watching my friend go through that experience, as I'm sure she learned a lot from me, watching me go through BLM and George Floyd and everything of 2020. So I guess to answer your question, social justice to me now is, if you have a seat at the table, look at the people around you. What do they look like? Do they look like you, or do they look like the world? For example, like if you're a business owner, look at your employees. Like I have a friend who posted a bunch of stuff for July 4th. I'm like, well, did you ever think about posting anything for Juneteenth? Because like it's a thing now. Like, you know, like I don't know. Like, I don't know. Have you thought about that? And I don't mind. No judgment, but like you should think about that. And yeah, I feel like for me, social, like for example, the short film, almost everyone save for two people is a person of color. And like, that wasn't even an intention. I just happened to look at the sheet and was like, oh, dang, like this really does look like the world. Because my social circle looks like the world, you know?
Well, and I'm making a little bit of an assumption here as I listen to you and know your story. I think being a child of God, you're more open to welcoming all his children who are just like you, right? We just all look different. So you have an ability to approach things with a little bit more of an openness, I would think, based off of your spiritual relationship with your higher being. And so as I look at that, there's also this a faith component within that, right? In all this and on your daily journey, how are you taking your spiritual piece and your faith on this next manifested vision of yours?
Faith in the process is something that I struggle with. I have a lot of anxiety, and anxiety keeps me up at night. And for one of the episodes we did on the podcast, the science podcast, When Science Finds a Way, was about sleep and about how sleep is being used as a like almost medicine, a prescription for some people experiencing psychosis. And he offered some basic tools and implements to help you sleep better. I struggle with sleep sometimes when I'm feeling incredibly anxious because I want so deeply for things to go well. And I'm stressed and I want everyone to be happy and I want everyone to feel taken care of. And that level of anxiety comes from a lack of faith in the process, that everything will be all right as long as you do your best. But like, take a breath, girl. Like there's some days where I'm just like, did you even breathe? This morning I was running around doing a bunch of things. My dog got his eye scratched. And so he has a scratched cornea. We had to take him to the vet and do all this stuff for his eye. And I had to stop twice for just a half a second and take a deep breath, because I'm learning if I don't take care of myself, I'm actually I'm not helping a lot of other people.
That's right.
Or my dog. And I think when I take a step back and think about this question you asked me, it comes from a struggle to find faith in the process. And like, I am not by any means a perfect person. I struggle with faith because I want to be able to control the outcome. And it's just in my nature. I want to be able to know how it's going to go. I want it to go well. I don't want to be surprised by anything. I want to have everything in the box and it be fine.
You sound very human, Alicia, by the way. You sound very human. That thing called human.
Yeah, it might be familiar. And so I'm just like reflecting on like, yeah, a lot of the anxiety comes from a lack of faith in the process. And what's beneficial, I would say, when you feel that way, is to look at the community around you, the people you surround yourself with. Are they helping you or exacerbating this anxiety that you feel?
That's right. Nice.
And I have surrounded myself with a community of people that go, girl,
bring the shoulders down, relax.
Yeah.
This too shall pass. Everything is going to be all right.
Everything's going to be all right. And sometimes hearing that does not help me. And then sometimes hearing that helps me a lot. And it's exactly what I need to hear, but again, I'm human, and I think having faith in the process does give you a level of peace that I think is so rewarding, feeling like everything's going to be okay. And I do.
Can I share another remedy or
oh my gosh, give me one.
Another tool for the toolbox?
Mm-hmm.
Because we all human, we all go through these phases. One of the things that I had to do a better job of is reflecting back on instances that I put all this energy and anxiety into, and they never turned out to be as, I don't want to say as bad, but as much as I envisioned them, changing, affecting, diminishing my life, right? So much of life, 10% of life is what happens to you, but 90% is how you respond to it. Right.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so I look at, play back all the instances that you put all this energy into and this anxiety thinking it was going to be so terrible. And really look how you came out of it. Mm-hmm. Like, we're still here and still thriving. So if I may share that with you, if you get something, 5 instances for whatever that you can always reflect back on to think, wow, I remember going into that and I just knew it was going to be a debacle, and look what came out of it. These beautiful flowers, this beautiful situation.
You're totally right. I mean, just even taking my career shift, for example,
boom.
At a point in my life, I probably felt like a failure, but looking at my life now, like, that was one of the best things that could ever happen to me. Something else, just to jump in on, like, opening up that toolbox, is I've benefited a lot from looking at a thing that I think is a problem and then asking myself, does this have anything to do with me? And many times I'm like, girl, this doesn't have anything to do with you. Mind your business. And sometimes that takes a lot of stuff off your plate.
There you go. Good for you. Well, so now this is the opening scene to your life documentary, and it's about to begin. What song is playing and why?
You know what just came to my head? A lovely day.
Oh, there you go. Lovely day. Lovely day. Look at, do it.
So
do it.
I that is the first thing that came to my mind, because who is that? No. Who sings that?
Is that Bill Withers?
Bill Withers, yeah.
It's Bill Withers?
Yeah. So that's the song that is the background music of my life, because there are a lot of bad things out there, and like, my life's not that bad. And even when things feel really bad and your dog's eye looks like it's going to pop out of his head, and you're like, figuring out this and that, and you know what? He's fine. Look at him. He's fine. And exactly. Like, it's so many times I just feel like, you need to take it easy. It's a lovely day. So
it's a lovely day. I love it. That's good. Well, we always close these sessions, with this one question, and it's really rooted in, a lot of what we talk about. I use analogy of like farming, like the planting of seeds and how you nourish it and you water it, and then it blossoms into this amazing thing. So I'd love for you to share what you feel are the 3 seeds that you'd want to leave with the stewards of culture moving forward. And these are tools that we feel put us and our culture in the best hands moving forward, based off of these 3 key things that come to your mind first.
I feel like the first thing is sharing. I'm always so excited to share my culture and to receive someone's culture. I want to learn about where you come from, what it's like. I want to eat a meal with you. I feel like sharing a meal with someone, especially if it's coming from your cultural roots, something that maybe like you grew up with eating. My mom just gifted me her mother's serving platters. So I have these serving platters that my mother ate rice and peas on growing up. They're like made in Jamaica. Like, they're so cool. And just yesterday I had a friend over and we fed her off of one of these bowls and these serving plates. And I feel like that level of culture, whether it's overt or kind of subverted in just even the way I decorate my home or anything like that, I think sharing, but also receiving it and being open to other people, it fosters a little bit of humanity.
Love that. Sharing
culture, connecting with your community. I feel like, so I would say connection, like I live in Sonoma County for a portion of my year, and there's not a thriving Jamaican first generation community out here at all. And so I'm almost giving this to myself. I keep saying, like, you need to find a rooted community here for yourself. And it's been on my list of researching where are my people, or do I have to commute down to Oakland to see them? Like, where are they at?
Right.
That is something that helps me feel connected to my culture and makes me a better person to share and receive when I'm like nourished within my own community. So I would say that. And also, like, take with you from your culture what serves you and let go of the things that don't serve you. So there's a friend of mine the other day said, you know, this is such an extension. Their friend left their war-torn country and they hated a lot of aspects of their war-torn country, but they love their food. And they love cooking the food from their culture and sharing it. And I was like, yeah, because you don't have to love the politics of where you come from, but you can love the food and the community. Like, you can choose. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. So I would say the third is just take what serves you and maybe
let go of what doesn't,
and start, because the culture, it does not get pushed onto you. You are the culture. So you don't have to take everything on and be a pawn of the system. You can take what serves you and be your own person. So
I love that. Well, I can't thank you enough for this time. I feel like we could have gone for like another 30 easily. Maybe that's part two.
Yeah,
but I do want to applaud you for your work. I do want to applaud you for the space that you're stepping in terms of being a vessel of purpose and utilizing, you know, your passion around science for the collective betterment of the world, and especially that of marginalized communities. Again, nothing is a coincidence. That's just God's way of remaining anonymous. And I'm glad you've stepped into that and see that, you know, you being an actor, actress, is now the platform that provides for a more scalable message to be received. So I ask that you continue to push, continue to do your thing. You have a community here who will support you, but I truly want to thank you for your time and your presence.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really a wonderful conversation.
It was a pleasure. We truly appreciate your support because it helps us fulfill our mission of promoting cultural awareness and personal development. Please click the subscribe button below to help ensure and solidify our mission.